When the pressure is high and the energy low, that's when your business needs inspiration to change and to grow. It's also when true captains show up. Hi, I'm Mark Francis, and I'm the host of this podcast that invites industry leaders from all over the world to answer the question, who's your captain? When you need to motivate and to mobilize, to develop and enable your team. Whether you are new to being a leader or you aspire to be a captain, this podcast is for you. I wondered, how on earth was I still standing after so many millions of these tiny steps? Where had all the energy and strength come from? I don't know. All I knew was I'd kept digging, and somehow I'd always found strength. Often in places I didn't know it could exist. As I took that final step, I didn't believe I was about to conquer Mount Everest. No human can ever conquer nature. Everest was as unconquerable as the rising sun and the spin of the galaxies. I felt that all I did was conquer the next step. I cried gently into my mask, tears falling down frozen cheeks. I was standing on top of the world. Bonita, that was you. And that's your brilliant book, The Girl Who Climbed Everest.
I haven't read it I can't believe that I wrote that. I can't remember, right?
This is the thing. I read the book this morning again. I'd read it when we first met, but I read it again this morning, and it really touches emotionally because you share how you felt at every step. And each step, if you're at the top of a mountain, which is over 8,000 meters high, each step takes ages by your account and takes a lot of effort just to take one step after another. But let's go back a bit, and we'll talk about your book in a bit as well, but let's go back a bit. And the thing I'd love to ask you is, what's your trigger? So your story begins beautifully in your book because you tell us about your upbringing, which was great with your brother, and it was all lovely, but you weren't a high achiever. And then suddenly you made a decision that you're going to do some extraordinary things, like climb Everest at the age of 22, excuse me, without having any mountaineering experience, and then go to the North Pole and be the youngest person ever to do both of those things, and. So the key question for me is, what's your trigger? What triggers that change in you from let's just get on with an ordinary life to let's do extraordinary things?
That's a really good question, and I don't think I've ever been asked it before. And I think I have reflected on it myself. Part of me thinks that the mountains were always in me. I just didn't have access to them until I was at university, which was when I discovered mountaineering. I was 20 years old when I started climbing. But before that, I grew up in Wokingham, a small town near Reading, no mountains. And my parents weren't outdoorsy types. They were into health and fitness, but the idea of climbing a mountain just was never a thing we did as children. And so the only things that I had as kind of those signposts in my childhood that suggested one day I might be a mountaineer was when we went on school trips. So school trip to North Wales when I was about 11, before I went to secondary school, and absolutely loved every single thing about the blisters, the heavy backpacks, the hiking in the rain up mountains. My friends were crying. I was like, this is amazing. I love this. Why aren't you enjoying it? And that was probably the first instance. And then later on, when I was in secondary school, on like the school ski trips, being in tears myself on the chairlift going up the mountain, just because I couldn't believe how beautiful it was. And my friends looking at me saying, what's wrong with you? And I remember thinking, what's wrong with you? Why are you not crying? So I feel like the mountains were actually always there. And the trigger was, I was at university, I was 20 years old, and I went to a lecture about mountaineering, and that just, and it was about Mount Everest, in fact. And these two climbers describe how then when they reached the top of Everest, they could look down and see the curvature of the earth beneath them. And in that moment, all of those childhood experiences, I guess, in the back of my mind, it all just suddenly hit me like I could do that. I could actually go and maybe climb a mountain one day like Everest, or even Everest. And that was the spark. But I don't think there was a clear trigger around being a kind of, average person, which I was. I was not an overachiever in any way, to setting my sights on a really ambitious goal. It wasn't like, I want to take that step. It was just, I want to be in the mountains. That was all it was.
There's some lovely moments in your book about when you actually get to the summit. It's actually very cloudy. It's quite windy. There's flakes of snow. It's sort of grey. And you said, well, it felt like I was on Snowdon again. And after all the hype, it wasn't that special. And so that's a fascinating journey, isn't it? I can see excellence and I can see amazingness. And then when I actually reach that peak, it might be a little bit of a letdown in some way. And yet there's a drive in you to say, I'm going to do something else. That's not the end of my journey. So where does the drive come from then? Maybe not a trigger, but there's now a constant drive in you, isn't there? Whether that's being a great author, award-winning speaker 2 years running, congratulations, 2024, 2025, Speaker of the Year. What's the drive then? Where's that drive come from?
Oh, I didn't win Speaker of the Year. I wish I won lesser awards, should we put it that way? But thank you for that. I would have many speakers shout at me if I didn't correct that. Okay, yes, I think Everest taught me to be ambitious, because it taught me that if you have a really clear goal that is, in the world that we live in, the goals that we work towards are kind of complex. The goalposts are often changing, so you're never really satisfied. But with Everest or with a mountain, it's a fixed thing. You want to get to the top. So that having something like that in your life that's just really clear and really fixed in the future, and then just breaking it down and going, okay, how do I work backwards towards that? Everest taught me that you can apply that methodology to anything in life. So becoming a great speaker or writing a book, especially writing the book, it was the same thing. I have got to hand in a manuscript on this day. It was as simple as it could be. Writing it was a lot more complicated, but I could always come back to a very clear goal. So I think that when you expose yourself to setting goals outside your comfort zone and then working towards them and achieving that goal, it's a real okay, this is possible. So that's, I guess, where the ambition comes from. And now I just don't really have a lot of time for not believing in myself or not being ambitious, because life's really short and I just want to achieve, everything that I've got on my bucket list. So the kind of self-doubt, all of that, it's just, there's no time for that. You've just got to go and try and fail, make mistakes, whatever. But just get on with it.
So the learning here from the Bonita Norris School of Excellence is aim high, but break it down. So take step by step, whether that's learning or surround yourself with experts and take the next step until you achieve. Is that the sort of success criteria?
Yeah, the thing that got me to the top of Everest was three things. Number one, it was I just got in contact with the right people who took me to the top of the world. I had an amazing team. And it's the same with most things in life. You've got the right people around you. You are riding the wave. So that's the most important thing, is your network. The second thing that got me to the top was luck. The mountain was in good condition. We didn't have a bad avalanche that, so many things are out of your control. And the third thing that got me there was, well, you don't just get lucky if you don't show up. I showed up and I just put in the work, and it was a lot of hard work, and it was a lot of picking yourself up when you were convinced of failure and carrying on, which when I look back now, I'm quite impressed by my younger self for doing that. But it was those three things, really. It was just the dogged determination, the luck, and the team. I didn't have any talent for climbing, put it that way. I wouldn't say that my natural skill was part of it, but it was those three things.
Well, this is it now. Let's go back to the book then, in terms of the girl who climbed Everest. You weren't an author when you started to write this book, so it's the same deal, really. Not an expert at writing books, and yet the book's excellent. Tell me a little bit about how you wrote a really good book with no author skills behind you.
Well, that's really kind of you to say. So when I got the publishing deal, the publisher wanted me to use a ghostwriter because I was, an untested author, and I agreed to that. I paid this ghostwriter. She interviewed me a few times, and then I didn't know what the process was. I thought we would work on the book together, but she literally a few weeks later just handed me a manuscript and said, there it is, it's done. And I read through this book based on these interviews that we'd done together. And I was like, this is not me. This is not my voice. I cannot put my name on the cover of this book. So I went back to the publisher in desperation with the deadline, already having passed, to hand the manuscript in, and said to them, please give me an extension and I'm going to write this myself. And fair play to them. They backed me. They gave me an extension on the deadline. And for the following 3 months, I rewrote the entire book from my perspective. And so when people say to me, did you use a ghostwriter? Yes, I did. Is there any of the ghostwriter's words in the book? No, but working with her was so much part of the process. And I think that that's something that we kind of forget sometimes. I could have written that ghostwriter off as a complete failure and a waste of money, but actually she allowed me to realize what I didn't want the book to be and gave me clarity, so that then I knew what I was going to write, and I went into it. And for 3 months, I was just in a fever dream of just writing and editing. And yeah, we got it in right at the last second. There were a few spelling mistakes in the book because it didn't have time to be proofread before it was published. So yeah, it was a bit of a sloppy finish, but done is better than perfect. And yeah, I was always happy with it to a certain point.
Well, the interesting thing is I had the same experience because I wrote a book. You're in that book for lots of lovely reasons. Thank you for being in the book. And exactly as you just described, I finished it. I had someone proofread it who is a proofreader and therefore did a great job. But apparently that still doesn't get everything. It doesn't get all the right grammar. It misses 1 or 2 spelling mistakes. And just as it was published and the book arrived at home, and it was lovely in the boxes, and the first time you get it, you go, oh, I can't believe I wrote that. Yeah. My wife then read it cover to cover for the first time. And it was brilliant feedback, Bonita. She said, it's full of mistakes. It's too wordy. And then she gave a list of other things that weren't perfect. And I said, my publisher said, perfect's not what you need first up. It's plenty good enough. Get it out there, and it's imperfect, and that's fine. And I agree with that, right? It's what makes your book magic is that we get to feel your emotions in every sense, the highs and the lows, and lots of little real life stories and I love this one, when you looked at yourself one day and said, I'm just not fit enough. I'm going to get back into the gym and I'm going to get back running. You get on a treadmill and you last 46 seconds. Mm-hmm. And then you went, that's it, I'm done here. And then the next time you got on, the next day, we lasted a minute. And anyone that's ever done anything athletically knows how that feels when you're not in shape. And the first time you do it, it's not the best. And then you just stick at it and you improve your time, your energy, your endurance. And running's a big part of your life now, isn't it? Isn't that a key part of how you do what you do?
Yeah, so running is really important to me. And the reason is you've mentioned that particular story. In the book, I talk about my sort of mental health as a teenager and how I had an eating disorder, which, every single day now you have another celebrity coming out saying that they had an eating disorder in the early 2000s. And it's like, oh, okay, so we were all dealing with this, like what? And nobody talked about it.
We're not alone, are we? We are not alone.
Totally. And but I feel really angry because these were the celebrities that I looked up to at the time. And now they're all coming out and saying, oh, yeah, I had this and I had that. And I was like, well, I did too, because I wanted to be like you. Anyway, so I had very badly disordered eating as I was growing up. And it really, really got me down. That moment you've talked about when I jump on the treadmill and run for 46 seconds, the moment before that, I had hit absolute rock bottom because I had gone to my GP and asked for help with trying to recover from my eating disorder. And the GP said, it's 6 months until I can get you booked in for a group therapy. And I thought, it's taken me so much to get to this point where I'm asking for help and you're telling me I've got to wait 6 months. If anyone's ever dealt with their mental health before, you know that when you're ready to ask for help, you don't need it in 6 months. You need it today, there and then. And so I just came home like completely deflated, thinking, I can't fight these demons in my brain. And I just admitted defeat to them. And it was in that like really lowest of low moments of just like resignation that I thought the only way that I can get over this is if I make myself feel good. Because when I do things that make me feel good, I don't want to make myself sick, starve myself, all that stuff. And I thought, well, what makes me feel good? And when I was a kid, I used to love running, and just so happened that my stepdad had a very old, dusty treadmill in the corner of our office at home. And I just got this thing out and ran on it for 40 seconds. And it was nothing, 40 seconds. But as soon as I'd finished that run, it was like I felt lighter. I felt positive. I felt like, okay, maybe I can get on with my day now. And it just was the tiniest switch, but it was all I needed. And it made me realize that when you do small things that nourish you, it has a ripple effect throughout your day. And so the next day I came back with very low expectation because, all I had done was shovel expectation on myself to get better, and I couldn't do it. So I just said, just try and just get on again. And I ran for a minute and I was exhausted because I was obviously so unwell at the time and unfit. And that 1 minute turned into 5, turned into 10, turned into a half marathon, turned into a marathon, turned into Everest. So I really,
and turned into walking to the North Pole.
Yeah, exactly. So I always think that
Wowzers.
day was the first day that I started trekking to Everest. It was the day when I chose to do things that were good for my body and made me connect with my body in a really positive way about wanting to make it strong, wanting to listen to it and work with it. And it was just that shift that changed everything. So, yeah.
Good for you. It's brilliant. It's a brilliantly inspiring story because you're an ordinary person who changed that into extraordinary by doing a few simple things differently and then consistently, which is a great message to anyone. I'd love to ask you about presenting because I first saw you and therefore first met you when you were presenting at a conference in Epsom Racecourse and about 200 people in the room. And I was in the room and I saw you present and I train presentation skills. So there's an innate energy to say, oh, can I give you feedback? And you very kindly said, yeah, go on, give me feedback. And then I asked you to come and present at one of our conferences and you were amazing. I now follow you on LinkedIn because you talk about the variety of businesses you present at and the different scenarios and audiences. And they, of course, reply to the LinkedIn and what an impact you have on people. Tell me about how that felt when you first started telling, and it's an Everest story to a large extent that you use, which is brilliantly visual, by the way, and engaging. So tell me about how you felt when you first started to stand on stage. Because again, this is new for you, isn't it? Being a communicator to large audiences. How did that feel?
I remember my first ever speech in public about climbing, and I had a piece of paper and my hand was shaking so much I couldn't read the paper. So the idea that today I present at conferences in front of like 600, 800 people, 1,000 people is just, I would never have expected that would be my job. And when I went into speaking, it never was a career choice. It was just like, oh, someone's invited me to the local library to I can't say no, or the WI or the local primary school. And I never had any expectation that it would go anywhere. So trust me, Mark, I was not a good speaker. But what happened was over time, the next school would say, oh, we heard that you went into so-and-so. They said you're really good. Can you come to ours? And eventually I got confident enough to start charging £50 just, to pay for expenses. And over the years have delivered like hundreds upon hundreds of speeches, but the vast majority of those were for either for free or for a very little amount of money. And it's only really in like the last 5 years that I've been able to kind of go, okay, this looks like it's a goer. This looks like it could actually be a job, and really sort of invested into it. But I think I've done my, not 10,000 hours, but I've definitely made every mistake you can make as a speaker. And I still do. I still don't actually think I'm very good. I always think there's so much to improve on, but I think that's a good thing as well. So yeah, I'm constantly thinking I need to have more time just to like sit with my deck and sit with my keynote and rewrite that. I've got to do that bit again. And I'm never happy. I'm never happy with it. That's
a perfectionist in you though, isn't it? That's the inner driver that says I'm never going to be completely satisfied. So I remember beautifully a LinkedIn post and I grabbed the photograph of you. And this was, I think, last summer. And this is you looking down a mountain and you'd climbed it incredibly in something like 4 hours. It was one of the big Alps. Was it the Eiger or something? The Matterhorn, that's it, the Matterhorn. Yeah. And you climbed it in 4 hours flat. And I'm thinking, I've been to the Matterhorn And I mean, it sounded like you were running most of the way compared to Everest. How do you do that? How do you climb a mountain in 4 hours that is effectively an Alp and 4,000 meters plus high? How do you do that?
Well, so I mean, 4 hours is a decent time. It was just under 4 hours. It wasn't,
Decent time. I love it.
the
Yeah.
work, but it wasn't exceptional in any way. Um, I I'm a mum now, so for me, it's really important that when I climb safely, and I'm not, speed is
Yeah.
not the biggest thing, but for me, I also know that speed is important for safety. So you want to move really efficiently. And the thing I did was I went with an Italian mountain guide, and we climbed it together. So I could rely on his route finding and his efficiency as well. And so that was why we were able to do it so quickly. And you also, you sleep a few hours at this hut on the bottom of the base of the mountain, if you like. And then from there, it's about just over 1,000 vertical meters, I think. So everyone,
Wow.
it's a really funny situation. Everyone arrives at this hut the night before. There were, on our night, about 80 or 90 people there. And you're then woken up at 3:30 in the morning. You come down for breakfast. I'm sitting there and I can look around the room, and I am one of 3 women out of about 80 or 90 people. And then at kind of 5 minutes to 4, they get us all lined up in front of the doors, and they have the doors locked. And then at 4 o'clock on the dot, this is so Swiss, they open the doors and they let you go. And it is just like this free for all. And you're already in all of your kit, your equipment, you've got your ice axe, whatever. And you're out into the darkness with like 90 other people just onto this mountain. And you want to get to the front, basically. So we charge out the door, and you just have to go, go, go. And it's such a thrill. It's like the adrenaline is running so high. And yeah, so mountaineering in the Alps these days, it's always been popular, but it's getting slightly more busy. And the skills that you need, maybe especially as a woman, you do have to be quite aggressive, probably more aggressive than you would be in real life. So I'm sort of like, I'm not getting pushed around.
Elbows are out. Elbows are out.
I'm not letting anyone push me around. I'm not letting people overtake me, but I will overtake you, that kind of attitude. And because it is life and death. And you do have to make sure that you're doing everything to look after yourself. And obviously you don't want to put anyone else in danger, but our goal is to get to the top and out of there as quickly as possible, and not be trampled on by the other people going as well. So we did a good job. We were happy.
So that's the professional mountaineer in you. And I'm just assessing, and I'm sure everyone else watching and listening is doing the same. You're somewhere on a spectrum between brilliant and bonkers. And every story you tell, I'm trying to think, where is this one? But I'd like to change pace a bit, because I noticed your energy when you were sharing what you did on the Matterhorn, and your energy changes when you talk about mountaineering. The pace of speech changes. You are clearly someone who loves being on a mountain, full stop. That's just brilliant. And you're a mum. And I'd love to just change the whole tone and talk about being a mum, because it's a totally different energy from climbing Everest or the Matterhorn rapidly. Tell me about being a mum. What's that like?
Do you know, so my husband, when I first met him, he was like, "Do you want kids?" And for me, the question was, the answer was, I don't, yeah, I mean, I see them in my future, but who knows? He was like, "Well, I really want kids. So it's really important, if we're going to make this work, that you want them too."
Let's decide.
So I'll do anything. I just want to be with you. Anyway, and he's about 6 years older than me. So he was very much like, let's have kids, let's have kids. And I was a little bit like, I still have mountains I want to climb, but my goodness, as soon as I held my daughter in my arms, or even being pregnant with her, I was just like, this is it. This is what it's about. This is what life is. And I still feel that. I've got 2 children now. My son is going to be 3 in April, and my daughter is
Magic.
7. And it's like the thing that I'm most proud of, the thing that gives me the most joy. And so, being a mum is really important to me, and it is way more important than the mountains, but I still love the mountains. That hasn't gone away. So my job now as a mother is to kind of walk this tightrope of being there for them, but also doing the thing that I love. And to do that, to walk that tightrope well, I have to think about risk a lot. And I have to go to mountains that I know I can, not that you can ever guarantee, but we can't ever guarantee even if we drive down a motorway that we're going to get there safely. There's a very high probability, of course, but there's no guarantee. So I am thinking about the mountains that I can almost certainly say I'll come home from. And then how can I make that more interesting? Because obviously if these are mountains that don't have high objective danger, they might not be the most exhilarating.
There's the balance, isn't it?
Yeah. So how can I make them more interesting? Well, there's an 8,000 meter peak in the Himalayas I'd love to climb. Very low objective danger, but maybe I could try and climb it without oxygen. That would make it interesting, and try and not use bottled oxygen. So that's kind of a plan where I have now. And I think that's what a lot of, parents do. Kids become number one, but we still want our thing, and we just have to do it in a different way and keep it interesting, but maybe not as time consuming or dangerous as before. And that's okay.
So yeah, I buy that. I'm going to throw this at you because it's very prevalent in my life. I've got, I'm very, very privileged to have a granddaughter now who is 2, just 2,
Yeah.
as she tells me. Well, actually, I ask her every day, and her age goes up a year every day now because she thinks that's the deal, right? So, but she's at 2. She was 2 last week, and what would I introduce her to that I used to do? And that had risk involved. So my question to you is this, and let's think about your son because he's the younger of your 2. 3-year-old says, right, I want to be a mountaineer and I want to do what you did. I want to climb Everest, but I want to be even younger than you were. How would you feel?
I like to say it's my biggest dream, but my worst nightmare. And I think those contradictions are allowed to exist. It is. Like my worst nightmare that my children would want to climb Everest, because it's such a vastly different experience today than what it was when I did it. There's just so many more people there. Global warming has meant that the mountain is a lot more dangerous to climb.
Yeah,
You're more
true.
likely to die in a queue on the mountain than you are from the dangers that I faced. So for that reason alone, it's just not the same mountain, and I therefore would not want my children to climb it. But also I love the idea that as they grow, we are trying to introduce them to rock climbing and taking them on climbing holidays. And we really want them to love this sport because it's so important to me and my husband. So it is a dream that they'll want to climb. But as a mum, am I allowed to say, yeah, but you stop there. That's it. That's enough.
Yeah, just be careful. And can mum always come with you?
Yeah. I mean, oh my gosh, that would be the real dream. But it would be my daughter or my son's literal worst nightmare, because I would be the helicopter parent. Because, in the mountains, you have to be a control freak. You really do. The tiniest thing that you miss or you don't do can have massive consequences. I've learned that the hard way. And so, yeah, to go climbing with my children on a mountain that's like a similarly dangerous to Everest, like it would be a disaster. I'd have to let them do it by themselves, because they would probably be safer than having
exactly.
They're doing it all for them.
Well, there's a role model element here, isn't there? Classically, as parents, I'm a parent of boys, and you are a role model in every context. And with my granddaughter, I've been trying to be really hard on myself that I never on a screen when she's in the same room. And it's incredibly tough because life is life. The phone buzzes and you pick it up, or I want to watch some sport on television. And it is consciously, I'm switching that screen off and giving her full attention, because if not, I'm role modeling the screen is more important to than you are. And yet, without thinking about it, I think we all do that, don't we? We all pick up the phone or sit at a dinner on our phones in some way. So what, as a parent now, Bonita, what are you hoping you're role modeling for your 2 amazing children?
Well, that is one thing. The children don't have iPads. In fact, we don't have a TV because my son smashed it with a hammer. And we said, well, we're not getting another one. That's it. It's a 3-year-old boy for you.
Yeah, game on.
And so we are really strict on screens, but it's me and my husband's screen time that we have to be really aware of. And so, yeah, I do find myself, we work from home, and there's always, as you say, it's really hard. And as a grandparent, perhaps you can when your granddaughter's there, you can set that time aside a little bit more. But when you're just a parent and they're there all the time and you're working from home, it is really
Exactly.
difficult. But
Exactly.
you're so right. If you behave your behavior from a young age is that the screen is more important than the child, and they internalize that. So I'm very aware of that. But the things I want to role model to my kids, well, there's so much. I think the most important one is curiosity. I
Oh, yeah.
just want my children to be open-minded, to want to learn. I want them to be rubbish at things so that they can learn how to be better at them. We sit at the keyboard and we try and learn music, and it's really hard, but it's like, no, this is great, because what you're doing, and I'm not saying it to my daughter, but what you're doing right now is you're training yourself to sit with the struggle. And so I just want them to be curious about what they can achieve. And also nature is really important to me, as you probably would have imagined, as a climber. And so trying to instill that in them from a really young age, like just, if I see something I like outside, like the way the light's coming through the trees, I will say that to my children. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? And give them that sense of like, oh, the natural world is this place that we can marvel at and we can find amazing. That's important to me too.
Sense of wonder, a sense of wonder.
Yeah.
This podcast is called Who's Your Captain, quite deliberately, because when you're on the mountain, to an extent, you have to be the captain, certainly of your own mentality and your own equipment and behaviors. But also the idea of who's your captain is that there's someone else that you can delegate to, that you can trust, that's part of your team. And when you were on Everest, you talk about this brilliantly, that Lakpa was yours, the Sherpa called Lakpa was yours, where at one point, effectively, you'd run out of oxygen and you were starting to hallucinate. And you were tapped on the shoulder and they checked in on you and then sorted it out and gave you a new oxygen tank. Tell me a little bit about the importance of team, because that comes through beautifully in your book.
Yeah, so Lakpa's such a legend. Lakpa Wangchu, he's helped so many people, including so many women, to fulfill their dreams in the mountains. He's just still out there to this day. Like, he's done Everest about 18 times. He's incredible. So having someone like that in your corner it just gives you that sense of like, if you got that person by your side, it gives you strength. And I don't know where that trust comes from. I think it was knowing how competent he was. It was knowing that, he had experience on the mountain. He'd been there before, but also I could see that he really cared about me. And I think that's so important, that he demonstrated a lot of times in small ways that he cared. He wasn't just taking me up the mountain or whatever in his mind, like, oh, who's this? It was like he really wanted to show me the stars. He wanted to show me things along the way of the climb. And it was just like, I really felt that connection with him. So I think that's how you build trust, is like, show someone that you care about them, show them that you're competent at what you're doing, and do what you say you're going to do. And that's pretty much it. If you can do those three things, people will trust you. So having him there was, it was amazing. I know that sometimes that Sherpa Westerner relationship doesn't always work like that. And there is a little bit of, a spark and an energy between certain people. We know that in everyday life, but I was really lucky to have had that. And I've had the opposite experience in the mountains. I've had people that I've trusted that haven't lived up to that at all, and broken my trust. And so, people are people, whether they're on Everest or they're in a team at work, whatever. And you just have to always, I think the most important thing, to trust someone else, you have to firstly trust yourself, as you've so eloquently put it. And that means that whenever you put your trust in someone, it's a decision that you've made. Like, I'm choosing to trust them. I know that they're a human. They're not a robot. They might make a mistake. They might get this wrong. We might fail. I can't blame them if they do, because I chose to trust them. So I feel like trust starts with you, and you have to give it out is a decision that you can make. And giving it to Lakpa was a good decision for sure.
Yeah, it's worth reading the book just to see the quality of the relationships that are built in those extreme circumstances, because it brings to life those three principles brilliantly. I'm going to ask you a question I've been dying to ask you, which is, what's the next big new adventure? And I don't mean another mountain. I mean something different, because you've been a successful author, now speaker and mountaineer and mum. What's the big new adventure? I'll give it a bit of context. At one point in your journey when you were younger, someone mentioned this thing called bucket list.
Mm.
And you were, what's that? And once it was explained to you that, oh, things you must do before you die, right? And you wrote a list. And on that list was climb Everest, and then you did it. So what's on your bucket list that you haven't yet done that's a big adventure?
There are so many things, and I want to not share some of them because
You don't have to. It's
the
too public.
the one that I will share is that I would love to go back to the Himalayas and climb another 8,000-meter peak. I've already been talking to LACPA about it, and to do an 8,000-meter peak without oxygen would be a really good challenge. I don't necessarily think I'm going to succeed at this, especially first try. But if you've read my book, you know that I've failed many times in my life. I've failed on Everest, and you have to pick yourself up and go on and do greater things after. And I know that with someone like him by my side, it might be a journey. We might have to return to the mountain more than once. But that I want to kickstart that process and give it the first try next year. And it would be a really amazing achievement to climb into the dead zone without supplemental oxygen. Not many people have done it, especially not many women.
Yeah, and you are a role model for anyone, and also, of course, for fellow women. So keep doing what you're doing. It's awesome. I'd love to ask you about this no oxygen, because, I mean, I've been up relatively high in a mountain, and by no means a mountaineer, but I hike a lot in the Swiss mountains, and some of them are pretty high. And I recognize when I get over about 3,500 meters, my body says no. And
Oh,
that's
right.
not heart and lungs. It cannot cope with that lack of oxygen. I start to change color in my skin. I go, I've got to get down.
Yeah.
Now, how do you know until you're in that situation that zero oxygen, your body can cope at 8,000 meters? How would you know that?
So there's 30% of the oxygen in the dead zone above 8,000 meters than there is at sea level. And that's a huge, huge difference for your body, because your brain, your heart, your lungs need pretty much a constant supply of oxygen just to survive. So the only way that you can climb a mountain like that and come back alive is to do it really slowly, so that your body has time to grow more red blood cells. And more red blood cells you have, the more oxygen you can extract from every breath.
And is that you go up and then down and then up again and then down? Is that the way you acclimatize your body to that journey?
Exactly. So yeah, we call them rotations. So we'll go up the mountain a little bit. It feels horrendous. You're being sick. You've got headaches. You come back down. You rest at base camp. You recuperate. You feel strong again. You go back up, and actually you can go a little bit higher this time. Your body somehow has adapted. And then you get to a new height. The process begins again. You're being sick. It's horrible. You come back down. And so there's a real lesson there in, like, where does resilience come from? It comes firstly from pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, of course, but it comes from rest as well. And in the Western hemisphere, we are so caught up in the pushing, but we forget about the rest. And, you can't climb Everest in one push. You can't climb any big mountain in one single push. You have to return to base camp, rest, recuperate, so you can come back stronger. So there's a great lesson in there. We can take so much from the mountains to kind of remind us of the things in life that are just universal truths. And that's one of them. So so going up to the death zone on this mountain I want to climb in the Himalayas, there's no oxygen. I will be breathing. I won't be holding my breath or anything, but I'll just only be being able to breathe what's in the actual atmosphere, rather than taking a tank of oxygen and an oxygen mask with me. So I just love the physiology of climbing. I think it's so fascinating to see that underneath my skin, all of these processes are magically taking place. Like pregnancy, you're not in charge of it. It's just happening in your body. And that's why I love pushing myself in these wild environments, because your body is designed for these places, but we've taken ourselves away from them. I'm in my comfortable house with the central heating on right now. I drive my car everywhere, but my body is capable of surviving in, like, the extremes. I just need to expose it to these places, and suddenly these, like, primal abilities start to wake up from within, and that's what I love, and that's why I do it. So it's going to be a good challenge for me next year.
Do you know, it just struck me that if you're not in the mountains for a sustained period, I don't know, let's say 3 or 4 months, and you're just not able for whatever reason to be in the mountains, do you
Mm.
become ratty and hard to live with?
I know. I
I mean,
I have been in the mountains like consistently for years because I've had young children, and it's COVID.
danger.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
So,
hence the question now: what's the alternative? How do you get that feeling of aliveness? Because when you talk about being in the mountains, either when you
mm.
were or when you're going to be, you absolutely come alive. That energy changes. What's the substitute when circumstance says you can't be up a mountain every week? How do you substitute that aliveness? What's the alternative?
It's just getting outside in nature, and also climbing we can do indoors. It's not exactly the same, but it does stimulate fear. You know, you can fall, you can hurt yourself. You've got to trust yourself. You've got to trust your body and your mind and your feet, and you've got to control your breathing. So even if you're just climbing at an indoor climbing wall, you're still getting your body is getting that little hit of adrenaline and dopamine and all of that stuff. And I think that keeps me sane as well. But yeah, exercise in the outdoors is probably the most important thing. And just knowing, taking a step back and going, I've got really small children. But, you know, I've seen mountaineers who are in their 60s and 70s climbing these big peaks. There's going to be a second wind for me. And when I remind myself of that, it makes me less hurried about the moment that I'm in now. It's like, enjoy these years with your children. It's going to be plenty of decades to get back into some serious mountaineering when they're older. So that just calms me down as well, makes me more sane.
That's cool. I'm going to come back to something you said about cultural difference, because you mentioned in the Western world we're very pushy and get on with it, and of course Eastern culture, which in that context is Nepal and the Himalayas, so different in terms of mentality, in terms of spirit, in terms of
Yeah.
pace. Everything is different. You know that because you've been there.
Yeah.
Describe the differences that you've recognized in a Western culture by behavior and an Eastern culture.
Well, the first one I would say is like assertiveness and statements of aggression or trying to be in charge does not go down very well with Nepalese people. They do not like hierarchy. Everyone is, it's a very, in some ways, it's kind of, I wouldn't say egalitarian, but no, it's not the done thing to kind of say that you're above everyone else and try and order people around. But mountaineering traditionally has been quite hierarchical. And so I think Sherpas sometimes, you know, naturally sort of wince when somebody's trying to order them around a little bit because it's just not what they grew up with. And that's something that we Westerners have to appreciate and learn from, I think, as well. The second thing is they're deeply religious. They're Buddhist, and it's not that, you know, they go to church on Sunday once in a while like maybe we do. It's their part of their whole life, and it bleeds into everything. So how they think about the mountain is completely different to how we think about the mountain, because they see it as there's a spirit that lives on Everest. There's a spirit that lives on K2. And if she's angry, and if that star doesn't come out, or you know, all of these things, and to Westerners we would call that superstition, but to them it is not superstition, and it's not even a religion. It's the very fabric of their whole belief system. So that even comes down to things like Sherpas genuinely believe in the abominable snowman. They believe in the Yeti, and they think that we're odd because we don't. So that you just gotta remember that the Sherpas are living in a really like elemental embodied world where there's mythical creatures and there's goddesses living in the mountains, and the stars will give them messages from above. And you know, and I think that richness is something that probably our own ancestors had, but we've lost in our modern society. But they still have, and I hope it doesn't die out. You know, Sherpas are very much exposed to the Western way of doing things now. And I do fear that they will lose some of that kind of richness in their culture because they're catering to their customers who are often Western. Yeah, but it's just beautiful and I love it. And the Sherpas also taught me, you know, when you go onto a mountain, you have to call your ancestors. and your ancestors need to come and be with you on the mountain. And that's just not something I would ever have thought of. But why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? And so I do it every time I climb now. It's just things like that. It's just beautiful.
What has stuck with you in terms of their way, a different way? What have you embraced? What have you said, you know what, I'm going to do a bit more of that myself? What have you taken on board from their
So,
example?
yeah, so ceremony and ritual is really important to them. That we have a puja ceremony, which is a big ceremony, a Buddha ceremony at the start of any expedition, where a monk will come up the mountain and read prayers, and it's almost a sort of celebration these days as well. And that's important. But then during the actual climb, every time the Sherpas would go onto the mountain, they would light branches of juniper at 4 o'clock in the morning outside the breakfast or the mess tent, the cook tent, and they would walk through the smoke from these burning branches, and that would kind of cleanse the energy, give them safe passage on the mountain. And it was just like this beautiful, but really, you blink and you'll miss it moment. But for them, it centers them. It gives them a sense of meaning, that they're part of something bigger than themselves. And it's just this really important ritual to kind of set the tone for the day. And I think that in the West, we could learn so much from that within teams around, like, if you want to bring people together and remind them of the mission and remind them to look after each other, then why not get some burning branches of juniper in the office every morning and walk through it? Like, obviously not that that's not going to happen, but what might be the equivalent of that? But the problem is that any ritual can become contrived and done, just because you have to do it, and it loses its meaning. So I think that's why we struggle in the West with things, because I don't know, we sort of we have to understand them in an explicit sense. Like, how is that going to help me to climb better, walking through smoke? If you can't list 5 reasons, I'm not going to do it. The Sherpas believe in like that implicit boost that they're looking for. It's like they can't see it, they just feel it, and that's what matters. And so it's that ritual ceremony, the implicit kind of being as important as the explicit, that I love.
I love that. It's triggered so many thoughts in my head. I've been a sports coach for many, many years, and
Oh, well, yeah,
I
I'm sure rituals super
the
important.
top teams I've worked with, that we would have a ritual. It wouldn't
Yeah.
be as spiritual as that, but it would
Mm.
be a ritual that brought us together, gave us confidence, sense of belief, sense of belonging.
Yeah.
And I think without that ritual, you're not as strong. It's as simple as that. So the
Totally.
concept of ceremony, ritual, I think is hugely important. The other thing that triggered, I was working in Thailand with a really big team, and I said, we're going to split into groups. And most of them hadn't met before, so it was a coming together, it was a launch. And I said, right, we're going to split into groups of 6, and I'm going to give you half an hour. I want you to come up with a team name and a goal for the learning for your team for the next 2 days. I'm going to give you half an hour. Off you go. After half an hour, I walked around the room to the group saying, are you done? And 100% said, no, not done. I thought, it wasn't the biggest of tasks, 30 minutes. I
Yeah.
said, so how much longer do you need? And they said, well, we haven't finished introducing each other to each other. So they hadn't started the task because they'd never met before. And we need to understand who we are before we do any tasks together. Now, that is a complete mental shift for me.
Mm.
Task given, time frame given, Western mindset, let's go.
Yeah.
Well, we don't know each other yet. So why would you possibly get on with any task until you've properly connected? Different mindset. As we come to the end, Bonita, I'd love to ask you 2 more questions. One is, what's on your mind now? And I mean that in that broadest sense. The next 6 months, what's the main thing on your mind now? And then I'll ask you the next question when you've told me that. What's the main thing on your mind now?
Oh my gosh. Well, in terms of work or goals, or just like something that I'm thinking about or that annoys me.
Yeah. And now I know you're thinking about Easter with a young family.
Yeah,
I know
exactly.
that. But in the broader sense, over the next 6 months, what's the main thing that's going to
I'm
take your mind
I'm
space?
just like raging against the machine these days. I hate every LinkedIn post, every Instagram post, I listen on, Thought for the Day on Radio 4, or I see an article and I know it's written by AI. And I'm listening, and I feel like our whole world is being taken over by people that have put something into ChatGPT and then have posted it, or are even reading it out at a sermon in church, you know, on a Sunday. And I'm just fighting against it in every way I can. I'm like refusing to engage, and it's, I guess it's, I'm like a Victor Meldrew at this point. If I see anything,
Grumpy.
yeah, really
Grumpy.
anything that I see. I mean, the ape. Look, I'm just being mean now, but every time I see anything that I got as hint that's been used, you know, someone else to write it, and I get that people are dyslexic, people really struggle, but do we really need to be filling the world with all of this pointless AI content? You know, if you do struggle, just maybe post less or whatever it is. You know, I don't really. I was really good on LinkedIn last year posting, but every time I go on there, I just see AI, and so that's on my that's on my mind today, because I think it's April Fool's Day, and I'm so fed up of all the AI April jokes. Yeah. So I'm really kind of, when I'm thinking about my work, I'm thinking about my clients, I'm thinking about human connection. I'm thinking about how can I help my clients to still succeed in an AI world. And I think it just comes back to, you know, as I've just mentioned, real human connection, real human skill that computers can't do. And so I'm spending a lot of my time thinking about how the world is going to change in the next 6 months or year or 2 years, and how I can help the people I work with to navigate that and to fall back on the things that make them human is probably the best way I can do that. So I hope that's
Thank
good.
you.
And I've
It's a
probably
good.
really annoyed a lot of people by saying that, because
No, that's good. I like it. It's real. It's real. And so the last question is this. You and I watch this podcast in 3 years' time. And what's your advice? And so the advice is around, I'd like to have achieved this. That's the nature of the question, that you look back and you go, yeah, that was on my to-do list and I've done it. Apart from 8,000 meters without oxygen, what's the next big achievement?
I've got two two unfinished goals that I've been working on for a long time that have nothing to do with mountaineering and nothing to do with speaking, but they're still private to me. I'm working on them in the background. But the problem is because they're not my main source of income and because they're not my one and only hobby, they always get left to the bottom of the to-do list. So my advice to myself, that I hope that when I look back in 3 years, is like, stop overthinking it, stop procrastinating, just 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there is what's going to get this project done. And that's how I climbed Everest, and that's how I recovered from my eating disorder and wrote my book. And you know, I've achieved everything in life is just by trusting that the small things add up. So I've got to take my own advice and do that.
What a brilliant way to finish. It's fantastic spending time with you, Bonita. I'm going to share this with everyone that I care about who will learn from it, and that's a lot. But certainly my granddaughter, when she's a couple of years older and can understand it, because it's important, the messages you give about self and about self-belief and what it can do. And I thank you for that. It's really cool.
Thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure.